When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It was the last bit of strength I had left, a little curtain I pulled down to hide the ruins. Her words weren't shouted. They were spoken softly, which somehow made them sharper, colder. "I think it's best if you leave now," she said. "We all just need some space." The world seemed to slow down in that moment. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a steady drumbeat against the sudden, heavy silence in the room. I looked at her, my son's wife, Sarah. Her face was a mask of strained politeness. She wasn't being cruel, not in her mind. She was just done. And I knew it. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask what I had done, how we had come to this point, standing like strangers in the hallway of my son's home. But the words wouldn't come. They were trapped behind a wall of shock and a lifetime of trying to keep the peace. A lifetime of biting my tongue and swallowing my feelings so that everyone else could be comfortable. So instead of speaking, I just smiled. It was a weak, watery thing, but it was all I had. It was my final, quiet act of dignity. I nodded, turned around, and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because I knew if I saw my son's face, the smile would break, and the curtain would fall. And I couldn't let them see the wreckage behind it. Not yet. Before Sarah, before the silence and the space, there was just us. Me and Michael. My son. My whole world. Our home wasn't grand, but it was a place filled with warmth and the smell of baking bread. It was a sanctuary built from small, happy moments. I remember the weight of him as a baby, asleep on my chest. I remember the sound of his little feet running down the hallway on Christmas morning. On Sundays, we had a ritual. We would sit at the kitchen table with the newspaper, and I'd let him fill in the easy words of the crossword puzzle. He would chew on the end of the pencil, his brow furrowed in concentration, and I would feel a love so big it filled every corner of the room. That house held our history. The worn armchair in the living room was where I read him stories every night, his head resting on my lap. The scuff marks on the baseboards were from his toy cars. The faint pencil lines on the kitchen doorframe marked his growth, year by year, until he was a man who towered over me. Every inch of that house was a chapter in the story of my love for him. I thought I was his home, and he was mine. Then, he brought Sarah home. I remember that day so clearly. He was nervous, more nervous than I'd seen him in years. And then she walked in, and I understood why. She was bright, like a firefly in the evening. She had a quick smile and a confidence that seemed to light up the room. She looked at my son with such love, and I saw his love for her reflected in his eyes. Of course, I felt a little pang in my heart. A quiet, selfish fear that every mother feels, I think. The fear of being replaced, of a chapter closing. But I pushed it down. I wanted to love the woman my son loved. I promised myself I would. I welcomed her with open arms and an open heart. I tried to show her my love the only way I knew how. I shared my recipe for Michael's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the one he always asked for on his birthday. I told her funny stories about him as a little boy, trying to build a bridge between our worlds, to let her know that I wanted to be her family, too. She would smile and nod, but there was always a little distance in her eyes that I couldn't quite cross. The wedding was beautiful. Seeing Michael standing there, so handsome and so happy, my heart felt like it would burst. I cried, of course. Tears of joy, tears of nostalgia, tears for the little boy who was now a husband. I watched him dance with his new wife, and I made a silent promise to them, and to myself. I would be the best mother-in-law a woman could ask for. I would be supportive. I would be kind. I would never interfere. I truly believed it. I believed we could be a new kind of family, one big, happy circle of love. I was so hopeful. I had no idea that my world, my small, perfect world, was about to be redrawn, and that I would soon find myself standing on the outside of the circle, looking in. The small cracks started to appear after my grandson, Leo, was born. He was a perfect little miracle, and holding him for the first time felt like falling in love all over again. I had raised a child, and I thought I had some wisdom to share. I thought it was my job, as a grandmother, to help. One afternoon, Leo was crying and wouldn't settle. I remembered how Michael used to like being swaddled tightly. I gently suggested it to Sarah. He might just need to feel secure, I said softly. Michael always loved being wrapped up like a little burrito. Sarah didn't look up from the baby. Thanks, Eliza, she said, her voice polite but firm. But the book I read says swaddling can affect hip development. We're doing it this way. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it. My offer of help had been received as a criticism. A small thing, I told myself. She's a new mother. She's stressed. I let it go. But the small things started to add up. They became a collection of tiny cuts that, over time, began to bleed. I remember one Sunday dinner at their new house. It was the first time they had hosted. I walked into the kitchen, my home for so many years, and instinctively reached for a knife to chop vegetables. It was just a reflex, the muscle memory of a mother who had prepared thousands of family meals. Sarah came over and gently took the peeler from my hand. I've got it, Eliza, she said with that same tight smile. Why don't you go relax in the living room? You're a guest tonight. A guest. The word hung in the air between us. I had never been a guest in my own family's life before. I walked out of the kitchen feeling strangely useless. Like a piece of old furniture that no longer fit the new decor. Then came the little comments, the ones that felt like tiny, sharp needles. Your generation really knew how to make things from scratch, she'd say, as she pulled a pre-made meal from the freezer. We just don't have time for that anymore. It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a dismissal. It felt like she was saying my way of life, my values, were outdated. Obsolete. Plans would change at the last minute. I would spend all day preparing for a visit from them, only to get a text from Michael an hour before they were due. Sorry, Mom. Something came up. Sarah's not feeling well. We'll have to reschedule. It happened again and again. I started to feel like I was an option, not a priority. An appointment that could be easily cancelled. I tried to talk to Michael about it. I would call him, my voice hesitant, trying to find the right words so I wouldn't sound like I was complaining. Michael, honey, I started once, is everything okay with Sarah? She seems a little distant lately. He would always sigh, a sound heavy with the weight of being caught in the middle. Mom, she's just stressed with the baby and work. You know how she is. She doesn't mean it like that. I think you're just being a little sensitive. Sensitive. That word became another small cut. He wasn't hearing me. He was trying to be a peacemaker, to smooth over the cracks instead of fixing them. He loved us both, and he didn't want to choose. So he chose to believe that the problem was my perception, not their actions. It was easier that way. But it made me feel incredibly alone. It made me feel like my feelings didn't matter. So, I started to change. I began to walk on eggshells around them. I stopped offering advice, even when I saw them struggling. I stopped reaching for the vegetable peeler in the kitchen. I stopped telling stories about Michael's childhood, because I saw the flicker of annoyance in Sarah's eyes. I made myself smaller. Quieter. I would sit in their perfect living room, surrounded by the noise and laughter of their new life, and I would feel like a ghost. I would smile and nod, and say very little. I learned to edit myself, to sand down all my rough edges, to become as smooth and agreeable as possible. I did it all for the sake of peace. I did it so I could still see my son and my grandson. I told myself it was a small price to pay. I didn't realize, until it was too late, that the price was my own voice. The day it all broke was Leo's 2nd birthday. The house was filled with people, Sarah's friends, her parents, a few neighbors. The air was thick with the sweet smell of cake and the loud, joyful screams of children. From the moment I arrived, I felt a familiar tension, a sense of being an outsider at my own grandson's party. I had brought a gift, a beautiful wooden train set like the one Michael had loved as a boy. Sarah thanked me politely and put it on a high shelf, away from the pile of brightly colored plastic toys from everyone else. I tried to help serve the cake, but Sarah's mother waved me away, saying everything was under control. I felt like a visitor from another time, a black and white photograph in a world of vibrant color. I was there, but I wasn't really a part of it. The moment that changed everything was so small, so insignificant. Leo was near me, his little face smeared with chocolate frosting. He looked up at me with his big, brown eyes, my son's eyes, and pointed to a piece of cake on the table. Without thinking, I broke off a tiny piece of the sponge and gave it to him. It was an act of pure grandmotherly instinct. Sarah saw it from across the room. I saw her face tighten. She walked over, her steps quick and purposeful. "Eliza, please don't give him any more cake," she said, her voice low but sharp. "He's already had enough sugar." She picked Leo up and walked away, leaving me standing there, my hand still outstretched, feeling foolish and scolded, like a child. A few minutes later, the tension was still hanging in the air. I saw Sarah pull Michael into the kitchen. They stood by the sink, their backs to the doorway, thinking they were having a private conversation. I was nearby, gathering empty paper plates, trying to make myself useful. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help but hear her voice. It was a fierce, frustrated whisper. "Michael, you have to handle her," she hissed. "I can't have that old woman undermining me in my own house." Old woman. The two words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air left my lungs. The sounds of the party, the laughter, the music, it all faded away into a dull roar. All I could hear was that phrase, echoing in the sudden, vast silence of my mind. Old woman. It wasn't just an insult. It was a dismissal. In that one moment, I was stripped of my identity. I wasn't Mom. I wasn't Grandma. I wasn't Eliza. I was a category. A stereotype. A problem to be handled. It was the confirmation of my deepest, darkest fear, that in their eyes, I had become irrelevant. A burden. Just an old woman. I don't remember the rest of the party. I must have smiled and said goodbye to people, but it's all a blur. I remember driving home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the words repeating over and over in my head. Old woman. Old woman. Old woman. The hours passed. The house grew dark. The phone rang, but I didn't answer it. I knew it was them. Later that evening, there was a knock on the door. It was Michael and Sarah. They had come to talk. But there was nothing left to say. The tension in the hallway was unbearable. The silence was thick with everything that had been left unsaid for years. And that's when Sarah spoke the words that began this story. "I think it's best if you leave now," she said. And I knew she wasn't talking about leaving their house for the night. She was talking about leaving their lives. So I smiled. I smiled because it was the only thing I could do to keep myself from falling apart right there in front of them. I smiled to hide the fact that my heart had just been shattered into a million pieces. I turned, and I walked out of their home, and out of the life I had once known. The door closed behind me, and the sound was final. It was the sound of an ending. The days that followed were filled with a silence so profound it felt like a presence in the room with me. My house, once my sanctuary of warm memories, now felt like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. The armchair where I read to Michael felt cold. The kitchen where we did crosswords together was just a room with a table and chairs. The silence was a constant reminder of what I had lost. I didn't answer the phone for 3 days. I couldn't. I needed the silence to grieve. I replayed that moment in the kitchen over and over again. I examined those 2 words "old woman" from every angle, like a jeweler examining a flawed stone. Each time I looked at them, they cut a little deeper. When I finally answered, it was Michael. His voice was strained, full of a clumsy sorrow. "Mom, are you okay?" We were so worried. "I'm fine, Michael," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me, like it belonged to someone else. It was calm and steady, with none of the storm that was raging inside me. He apologized. He said he was sorry for how things went down. He said Sarah was just stressed and didn't mean it. He used all the same words he had used for years, the verbal bandages he used to cover up the wounds without ever cleaning them. He was still trying to be a peacemaker. But I realized then that peace was impossible. He never mentioned the words I had overheard. He couldn't. To acknowledge them would be to acknowledge the truth of the situation, and he wasn't ready for that. He was loyal to his wife, and in that moment, listening to his careful, hollow apology. I understood that he should be. She was his present and his future. I was his past. And a mother's love, a real mother's love, is about knowing when to let go. After we hung up, something inside me shifted. The sharp, agonizing pain began to dull, replaced by a deep, quiet sadness. I walked through my silent house, touching the objects that held my memories. I pulled out old photo albums, the pages filled with smiling faces from a different time. I saw myself as a young mother, full of energy and purpose. My entire world had revolved around being Michael's mom. Then, after he was married, I tried to become a great mother-in-law. And when Leo was born, my new purpose was to be a wonderful grandmother. I realized I had spent so many years defining myself by my role in other people's lives. I had been so focused on holding on to my place in their family that I had forgotten who I was without them. In my desperate efforts to hold on tightly, I had perhaps, without ever meaning to, been part of the problem. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and a piece of paper. I decided to write a letter to Michael. It wasn't a letter of anger or blame. There was no room for that anymore. It was a letter of love, and a letter of release. I told him how much I loved him, and how proud I was of the man and the father he had become. I told him that I understood that his family with Sarah and Leo was his priority now, as it should be. I told him that I was sorry if my own love had ever felt like a burden to him or his wife. And then, I let him go. I released him from the impossible job of being the man in the middle. I told him he didn't have to fix this, and that I needed to find my own way forward now. I sealed the envelope and put a stamp on it. I didn't know if it would change anything between us. But as I dropped it into the mailbox the next morning, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The letter wasn't for him, not really. It was for me. It was the first step in reclaiming my own story. It was me, finally finding my own voice again, even if it was only on a piece of paper. Months have passed since I mailed that letter. The world did not stop turning. My heart did not stop beating. Life, in its quiet, persistent way, went on. Things are different now. There was no tearful reunion, no dramatic scene of forgiveness. The relationship I have with my son and his family has been rebuilt, but on new ground, with carefully placed boundaries. The old, easy intimacy is gone. I don't drop by their house unannounced anymore, and they don't call me for last-minute babysitting. We see each other on holidays and birthdays. The visits are shorter, more formal. Sarah is polite to me, and I am polite to her. There is a quiet respect between us now, born from distance. It is not the warm, loving family I once dreamed of, but it is peaceful. And after years of walking on eggshells, I have come to cherish peace. In the silence they left behind, I began to hear my own voice again. I started to rediscover the woman I was before I became a mother, before I became a mother-in-law. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with, our conversations picking up as if no time had passed at all. I joined a book club, and found a thrill in debating ideas with women who saw me not as someone's mother, but simply as Eliza. I found joy in my own company. I started taking long walks in the morning, just to watch the sunrise. I began to work in my garden again, feeling the satisfaction of nurturing something and watching it grow. My home, which had felt so empty and sad, slowly began to fill up again, not with the noise of a family, but with the quiet contentment of a life lived for myself. I don't hold any anger towards Sarah anymore. I see her now not as the woman who broke my heart, but as a young wife and mother, fiercely protective of the new world she was trying to build. We were two women who loved the same man, trying to find our place in a story that didn't have room for both of us to be the main character. And Michael. I love my son more than words can say. I know now that the greatest act of love I could give him was to let him go, to free him from the impossible choice between his mother and his wife. Our love is different now. It's quieter. But it's still there. Sometimes, I think about those two words, old woman. For so long, they felt like a brand, a mark of my irrelevance. But now, I see them differently. I am an older woman. And with that age has come a kind of wisdom I never had when I was young. It is the wisdom to know that your worth is not measured by the role you play in someone else's life. It is the wisdom to understand that love sometimes has to change its shape to survive. And it is the wisdom to know that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you build with yourself. My heart did break that day. But hearts can heal. And sometimes, in the broken places, something new and beautiful and strong can begin to grow.